Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. With this video, we'll be taking a look at the sixth and final Adventure Path module to Pathfinder's War for the Crown campaign, titled The Six Legends Soul. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shout out to my Platinum patrons, Andrew and Brian, and Gold patron, RPG Papercrafts. Thank you so much for your support. As we click on over. Alright, so we are finally at the final War for the Crown Adventure Path. By the way, this review is coming out the day of Wizards of the Coast's Dragon Heist module. So if you were expecting that review, I apologize. I just now got my review copy of it from Roll20. I will be working on that. That will be coming out. Today is Friday the 7th, and I should have that one due by hopefully published Tuesday the 11th for patrons, and then maybe do it Wednesday for public everyone else. I'll do another video on explaining all that. But just to be aware, I will be working on that one. But this is the one we'll be doing with this one first, because this one released before that one. So, War for the Crown has been a really solid adventure path so far. I've enjoyed following along. I don't play Pathfinder really anymore. I think it was great when D&D was kind of going through a bit of a crisis of conscience, but now that we have 5th edition, I think Pathfinder is faded a little bit. And I don't want to, shit over Pathfinder. That's not what I'm here to do. But in terms of my own personal interests in my groups, we pretty much stick to D&D 5th edition. But I really like this storyline. I've been enjoying following it quite a bit. The political machinations have been a lot of fun. All the really crazy creatures they use, and just it's nice to follow a campaign that actually goes into those later levels, which is something the published WotC campaign adventures really never do. Most of them end anywhere between 10th and 15th level, whereas this one really goes beyond. And in point of fact, this particular adventure is designed for 16th level PCs, which is pretty huge. And I think it's a lot of fun, because it starts off with the murder investigation that was teased at the end of the previous adventure module, and that they get to the bottom of this dungeon, and then they overhear this communication that, their benefactor, which is Princess Eutropia, has been assassinated, has been murdered. That's a big shocking revelation and a cool moment at the end of the last module. It's kind of the big cliffhanger. It's like, you stopped this big bad thing from happening, but then your benefactor got killed while you were away. Literally the person you've been working for and trying to put into power of this war-torn country. So part 1 opens with them having to go back. They do a whole murder investigation, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of skill checks. It's a lot of social encounters and just investigative work, which is nice. Part 2 is just a big old dungeon crawl when you actually follow the clues and leads together, and it's a really satisfying, neat dungeon that we're going to look at. And then part 3 is a bit of a twist that happens, although you can kind of see it coming from things that happen in part 2, where the prince, who's pictured here with the kind of halo, ends up basically being possessed by the different former emperors that have been sewn into his soul and kind of gone crazy, and the PCs have to do a couple things in order to even gain access to him. And then it turns into this, it reminds me of an episode of Legion, where they have to enter his mindscape, or kind of like a Professor X thing, and battle all the different forces. So, but I think it's a good adventure. Let's go over what is included in the $24.99 The Six Legends Soul module on Roll20. You get 5 5-foot battle maps with dynamic lighting. One of them is a repeat from a previous module. It's the Palace of Birdsong, which I believe was in the second War for the Crown module, and it's just been emptied. And it's used because in part 1, that's where the PCs travel to do the investigation of the murder. That's where Eutropia was. So it's nice to have that map. Obviously, because this was added in to the others, you could have just clicked on that one. And here you can see above, these are all the different maps, which if you add in, every single piece of this adventure path, you get a really, really big campaign here. But a DM could have just used that map from the second one right here, Palace of Birdsong, and then it's repeated here at the end. And it's just been emptied out. Where is it? There it is. So there's just no tokens there. And I kind of would have liked to see, some tokens in place that make sense with the people that they're talking to, but there's not really any combat here, so you almost don't even need any kind of map, so I'm very forgiving in this regard. A lot of times there's been maps missing, and I've been very harsh about that because there's been obviously like, a battle map needed. But here, there's honestly not any combat in all of Part 1. It's pretty much just investigative work. You also get 41 unique NPC character sheets with their matching tokens, GM descriptions, including 18 background NPCs. About half of all those unique ones have pictures and handouts. 45 NPC monster sheets with draggable tokens, vision, separate player handouts. 103 magic item player handouts. That is insane, and I think it's partly because as these magic items are added in previous adventures, they just keep adding to that total because you have to add the ones that were retroactive so that they're still there for the players to view. So I think it just keeps on kind of adding. It's not like 103 new magic items. It's just like, here's all the ones that are now in the campaign up to this point. So you end up with a bunch. Unfortunately, only 27 of them have pictures, and a lot of those picture ones, there's like 10 different belts with like slightly different pictures. I don't know if that's just a Pathfinder thing or what, but it's very disappointing. There's not a whole lot of pictures for the magic items. You get a journal organized into 3 parts, each containing DM notes, maps, and handouts, although Part 1 is actually very bereft of any kind of visual aids. Your alphabetized token page, which is pretty much par for the course now. Every single adventure that Roll20 does puts all the tokens on a single page. The extra notes and lore we get this time are of Taldor's Ulfengard, which do come into play at the very end of the game, and the Spirits of 6 Emperors, which also comes into play at the end of the game. You also get rollable tables for optional random encounters in Taldor, and rollable tokens for the shapeshifters. So we're going to go over real quick all the different parts of this adventure. As I mentioned, Part 1 unfortunately has no maps or visual aids or anything for me to show you all. It's just all story stuff. This is the one picture you get. This is Princess Eutropia's body after a gentle repose spell has been cast. And the PCs are given a pretty cool scenario where they have to just follow the clues that were given. And it turns out that Eutropia, she's been very clever and resourceful this whole time, very likable character. And she knew this assassination attempt was coming, and instead of preventing it, she allowed it to happen in order to draw the assassins out. And her plan was, at the moment, or right before the moment of the murder, she has a magical artifact, a necklace, that allows her to transfer her soul into that necklace. So she sort of saves her life by doing that, and then her body just kind of sits there soullessly, and then the murderer kills the body, and then it is dead. And I guess there's a mention of something happening, because it seems weird that assassinations even happen in a world where you can just raise the dead, and sure enough, that's mentioned somewhere in here, where if the PCs ask, like, why didn't we raise the dead? Like, we can. It's because, and her soul is in that necklace. Because they want to think the bad guy, she wanted to think the bad guys that they had done that, and then also left the clues behind that, by this assassin showing up and doing that, then the PCs can find it. The only thing I really hate is that one of the major plot elements is the fact that she has a beloved dog that she basically wanted to lock away and keep away from the situation because she knew she was going to get killed, but the dog escapes and rushes to her aid. The dog fights off the attacker, but the attacker ultimately kills the dog and then kills, Eutropia's soulless body. And a big plot point is the fact that because the dog attacks the assassin, he's got like bits of the assassin's like flesh in his teeth, whatever, and so the PCs can learn a big thing over there. Well, the dog was killed and buried. So a big part of this investigation is the PCs have to fucking exhume a dead dog's body and then search it, and then they find like a key inside too, which was placed there, I think by Carius, the prince, for some damn reason, which leads them to the next like plot element. And I hate that. That's like something out of Saw. That's horrible. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't want to subject my players to do that. Obviously, I'm a big animal person, so that was very affecting to me, and I imagine I'm not the only one, so I'm not saying that's a big trigger warning or something, but it kind of is. Like, that's kind of a big thing for me, is I don't want to see that kind of level of violence towards animals. Like, it's the dog dying thing was fine. I was okay with that because it made sense for the story, but then to take that and have to like dig him up and do all this like searching for the body and all that, I was not comfortable with that at all. I did not like that one bit. And I liked it better where it was like, an option to like speak with the dead with the dog and all that, because it's a fantasy world and you can do that kind of thing. That made more sense. But having this like key put inside the dead dog, like, oh, that was pretty messed up. I'm not a fan of that at all. But I like the twist that you find out that Eutropia, and of course in the reading of the will, which a funeral is a big part of that Part 1. I'm not going to click on all these and go through them, but all this information is obviously here. There's a full timeline, which is nice. This whole section is very well organized in terms of the DM can understand exactly what the PCs have to do. But in that reading of the will, um, the PCs are bequeathed the necklace that holds her soul, and then of course they can do some kind of magical. And at this point, at level 16, PCs have a lot of access to a lot of magical items and a lot of magical spells that could really help them in this investigation, including like contacting other planes and speaking with the dead and all that kind of stuff. So it does give some hints and things on how to do it, but a lot of it is just like at this point the PC should be able to solve this crime like fairly easily without much fuss. And what that does is it leads them to the Immaculate Circle, which is part 2. And the Immaculate Circle is basically the secret, shadowy cabal of immortal nobles who run Taldor from the shadows. And their whole plan with this entire civil war was this Prince Carius figure, which is the younger brother of Princess Eutropia. And the goal was to resurrect him, take him, he was killed when he was a boy. Take his soul back from the ether and then put it in this literally like cloned, vat-grown body by one of the Immaculate members. One of them basically got the soul, the other one built the body. But in getting the soul, it was like fractured, it was broken, like it wasn't going to survive in the world. So they had to piece it together, and they decided, well, let's piece it together using all of these noble, powerful emperors of Taldor. Like Taldor's history, and we'll create this really strong, powerful, godlike emperor that is under our complete control. Alright, that's fine motivation. And then that obviously is the reference to the title of the 6 Legend Soul. It's these 6 like God King Emperors within this poor boy. And the Immaculate Circle is behind all that, and so the players finally find it. There is a brief aside where they go to these Imperial, and it's all just in this town of Haydn that they just travel to. And there's nothing at all going on in Haydn. I believe it's literally just pretty much a dead city, vacant and crumbling, but there are signs of passage, and it just contains the stronghold that the Immaculate Circle works out of. It's their hidden villain base, essentially. But just one of the side things is that the assassin is in this Imperial Archives, which this is the first map I can show. And unfortunately, it really is just kind of a side jaunt. It's almost like the assassin is just a nobody. He's just a guy who wants to make big with the Immaculate Circle by performing this assassination of Eutropia. He's a cool-looking dude. Rian, Shadow Dancer, is a little shadowling pet thing. He's got that cool witch doctor, bird mask thing going on. It seems like a neat character, but he also seems just criminally overused. He doesn't have this is pretty much it for his backstory and whatnot. And it's a pretty easy situation. You just walk in here and there's this weird what do they call him, Pathfinder outsider, demon character, which there's a lot of these in this campaign too. It really uses a lot of the concept of a creepy horror creature that just fucks with your mind. Almost every single adventure in the campaign has used this kind of creature, and it's just everywhere to the point where it's now I'm nodding along okay, yes, here is this module creature, Shatterex. But it's just a very mini, I wouldn't even call this a dungeon crawl. So he's just hiding out in this base, and you just confront him and fight him, and there's not even much role-playing notes. So a little disappointing that the assassin's not really a big deal. What is the big deal is the fact that that his location will lead the players to the Shadowed Halls, which is the actual stronghold of the Immaculate Circle operates out of. Which this is a neat dungeon. It's a very large, and this is part 2. It's a very large dungeon that basically has a bunch of really cool villains in there, a bunch of just evil, immortal, nobles. So it's a vampire, 3,000-year-old wizard, an old shape changer, somebody who's been cursed by the Fae. And it's just all these people. What they have in common is that they've been granted immortality, usually because of some, immortal beings usually aren't good people. They went that way because they are horrible and evil. And they all work together here as literally just kind of a supervillain organization. And I like this opening situation where they have this, you can see the snake-like tunnel system they have to walk through. And all of these are secret doors, you can see on the dynamic lighting. It kind of works out where there's separate things you can open. And they're all secret doors. The players have to roll these really high, and again, all the skill checks, all the traps, all the monsters, everything's really high. This is a 16th to 17th level dungeon, so you're going to fight some really tough creatures and have some interesting designs. Although maybe not the most interesting dungeon compared to some of the other ones, but I still like certain elements of it. I was a bit confused by this area because the actual story doesn't mention the fact that these are maybe I just missed it somewhere. These are other nobles, not bad nobles, good ones the players met early on in the campaign that are here with this monster, I guess, stalking them. And there's another kind of divination. It's kind of a neutral outsider. There's the theme here is it's a bunch of nobles that have like a lot of slaves or thralls or servants, and they're performing all these unholy rituals, and it's a very tight theme, and I think they do that pretty well here. And then all these different paths lead to the lower section, which is the same dungeon. It's just two of the 5-foot maps are the same dungeon. This is just the lower half of the Shadowed Halls. These gigantic lions. Look at the size of these lions. That's the size of like a fucking full-grown dragon. That's crazy. The ultimate villains here, which this is an interesting one. This is a shape changer that is the classic, like, when you first go downstairs, you see, oh, there's Princess Eutropia. She's like, help me, and of course it's this shape changer and wants to kill the PCs. The main villains are, I believe this is the vampire who's just the classic, like, evil scientist. Reminds me of the Dr. Poison character from Wonder Woman, who actually grew the Prince Carius body and subsists on a bunch of vampire spawn that she made herself from elves. So it's kind of a mini boss fight there, and then the ultimate boss is this Duke Panavar Lothide, who is the old wizard guy. He's on the GM layer, isn't he? Panavar, born over 300 years ago. Oh, sorry, I said 3,000. 300, yeah, 3 centuries. And he is a bit of the mastermind of the campaign, I guess. Pretty much one of the main villains, because it was his plan to take Prince Carius and use him as a puppet ruler for Taldor, basically. So you can confront him. There's obviously some big traps along the way. If you sneak up on him, you fight him here. Otherwise, he runs and you fight him here. And then you discover the Crucible here, which is where they actually did the process of bringing back Carius' soul. And he used this creature, which is not even used in this campaign, but I believe it does have a stat block, if I can find. It was I don't remember the name. It was a Saki named Thresser. There it is. Thasfertome. You can see here, it's pretty crazy looking. It's got like crow heads and like a tree body. But it was this creature that this Duke Panavar Lothide worked with to actually steal the soul. And this creature is actually used in the post game, but it's not really used during this campaign. And you kind of fight him, and that's sort of the main villain. And then you defeat him, and you can actually, at the Crucible, you can resurrect Eutropia, because if the players took that necklace and they kind of realized what it was, then they can make it all the way to the Soul Crucible at the end of this dungeon, and then use it on Eutropia, and that will actually resurrect her to life. Although it says you can just probably raise her after you've dealt with these guys anyway, because then she deems it safe to be able to resurrect her anyway. But it's nice that there's kind of a nice moment here, and there's a picture to go along with it. The players can resurrect Princess Eutropia. Now, the big twist at the end of Part 2 and the beginning of Part 3 is that, meanwhile, while the players have been dealing with this, Prince Carius has finally snapped. His souls have taken over, and they are now running the show. And it's a weird, like, hand-waving thing that happens where basically in the, like, 2 days or whatever the players have been gone, he has completely assumed command and branded the PCs as villains that killed Eutropia, even though the PCs have spent their entire campaign working up their street cred, their reputation with this entire country, doing all these things where they were becoming like famous heroes, and now this Carius just suddenly condemns them as being the villains behind her death, and they become instantly like Taldor's most wanted, which kind of sucks. But it's an interesting twist. I don't know how well it works, because the first thing you have to deal with, it feels like you reach a climax at this point. Like, you defeat the big bad of Lothide and all these dungeons. You've cleared out the evil cabal. You've resurrected Eutropia. It's like, all right, we did it. And then you get back and you're like, oh wait, now we're villains. And you have to do I'm torn about this. It's hard to tell if it would work pretty well. It's just, the first thing you have to do is win favor back with the country. This is the actual handout you get from your other Martella Lothide, which is your ally. So yeah, there's a bunch of things you have to do listed here. When Carius' shield is behind the greatest security apparatus in Taldor, PCs must act with guile rather than strength of arms. Cautiously and quietly unravel the prince's support network to leave him vulnerable to order approach. So it wants to do the social combat thing. It wants you to do that thing which has been a neat part of this campaign, which is you are using skill checks, you're schmoozing with people, you're making the right decisions. None of this is combat related, but you're doing things like socially with skill checks and with your own reputation and maybe with money and all that. And there are things you can do. So there's the public perception you have to fix. There are paid informants, palace servants, royal guards. All of these things are listed of ways that you can that you need to do to access Carius. And I think there would be a good way to do that for a DM to still make it exciting and tense. I just would be very wary of the action slowing back down for this finale as they're trying to work. And it just feels like you're coasting on a nice high from doing this dungeon, and then you're going to part 3 and then being, okay, now you've got to go back to Nose to the Grindstone and actually do some work, because the people have apparently just forgotten about all the good work you've done these last, however many hours you spent in the campaign. It does mention, now obviously you come out of this dungeon and you've got the damning notes of both those 2 primary villains, the vampire and the 3 centuries old wizard guy. And you've got Eutropia resurrected probably. But it says all those 3 things would only be enough to sway half the people, and they'd still be very divisive. They'd be shouting fake news or something. You're coming in with all that information. So you have to do all these other social checks. There are scripted events that happen because it is timed and triggered events. It's literally they have 7 days until the coronation, and it's all these things will happen around Taldor. There are random encounters you can do that occur, and it's a bunch of skill checks. Some of them might be combat. I don't know. I'd be leery about. It might be a good idea to do a few of these things, but I'd be leery about dragging it on for too long, because I just feel like you're messing up with the flow and the pacing of the adventure at this point if you slow things down too much for this very final part. In any case, at some point your PCs will gain access to the palace. Whether or not he's the Grand Prince or not, he's been crowned, doesn't actually really matter. Although I think a few more guards get added to the palace, but the entire castle is not mapped, unlike the. Was that the last? I think it was 2 adventures ago. It was the climax of that one, Abadar's Pillar. This one is just it says Imperial Palace, but it's basically just the throne room and the very outside area. And the adventure even mentions here that look, yeah, the PCs are powerful enough that many of these defenders can't truly threaten or hinder them, and they are mentioned here for reference's sake. So even the adventure shrugs, and it's look, at this point the PCs could absolutely storm. Why are these fantasy worlds not ruled by all these level 20 PCs? Because they've got so much power at this point. I guess they're not 20 yet, they're 17 or 18, but they could basically just bust down the doors of this palace, which kind of renders that whole social combat thing almost moot, except again you hope that that's part of the campaign process, is that you want to motivate them to actually win the hearts and the minds of the people, and not just be like the murder hobos of busting down the door and going to war, which might have some consequences. But so it mentions that this isn't even much of a combat encounter, although there are combat opportunities here if you want to run them. In any case, this is actually an illusion. They will make it to the back room where they will discover Princess Carius is kind of in a fucked up state, and he's got the swirling kind of souls around him, and it is literally like an X-Men mind not astral plane, mental plane, where you get a ring from the villain from the Shadowed Halls that lets you enter the mind of Prince Carius, and that begins the actual finale. And unfortunately, none of that is mapped at all. But it seems pretty cool. You have to fight all 6. You don't fight them. You have to deal with all 6 emperors through these literal doors. It feels very like Game of Thrones-ish, where that scene where Daenerys is going in the mindscape and has to walk through all the doors and open the doors and see things. In this case, each one is a different emperor that the PCs have to deal with. And they're not all combat. Some of them are combat, for sure. There's different rounds of combat that they have to go through, and there's kind of, basically legendary boss fights that they have to deal with. But some of them are just kind of puzzles. There's one involving cups of I'm just scrolling through them right now. There's one involving cups of poison, which seemed really interesting. I was just kind of skimming over it, but it's that classic, 6 cups for his fall. They each have different things. And it's that puzzle where it's the poison cup is next to either a silver cup or a platinum cup, where they give you clues about which one is where. I always kind of like those. All those kinds of puzzles. So I think that's a fun one to do, where they can use skill checks and that. So that's not a fight. That's just a puzzle they have to get through. And another one is there's a bunch of guards, 3 times or 4 times as many PCs as guards show up. Just a huge army of these pretty powerful these Ulfin guards, which are pretty powerful. And the PCs have to roll basically some kind of a charisma style check, or in this history or whatever those are. and they can persuade guards to like join their side for that battle. And there's this kind of almost like strategy game style battle there using those charisma checks. So I think there's a really good mix of things here, and it's a good way of letting the PCs, like giving each PC a chance to shine. You know, it's not all just a big combat fight. It's a sequence of events where some of them is more combat related, some are more charisma and social related, some of them are more just straight puzzle and intuition related, that I think every player would find something to enjoy there. So I do like that, as much as I'm not quite sure about this final assault on the palace and the actual drumming up the support, and it just feels like having to redo a lot of the things that they were doing over the entire campaign. But this very last part, where they have to enter into these mindscape doors and deal with these former emperors, is very cool. It's just a huge shame that none of that whatsoever is mapped at all in Roll20, especially because some of them do involve combat, so that's a bit of a bummer. There is a neat epilogue here at the end where, and this is something Eutropia mentions, if they had saved her, is that they obviously still want to save Prince Carius because he was not in control. He was not, he was basically possessed. The PCs can either use a portion of Eutropia's soul, which there's a process for that. Whenever they resurrected her, they could save like a portion of it, which kind of weakens her, but can be used to restore his soul, because the reason he was given all these extra souls is because his soul is basically like was fractured in the process of coming back to life, decades later, whatever it's been, being drawn from that afterlife, and he can't really exist. Like, he's dying after this happens. He can't really exist in this world. And they can fix him with either that, or it says that a PC can sacrifice themselves to heal him, straight up killing them, or it says at the DM's discretion, all of the PCs could join together to give a portion of their souls to restore him, which literally mechanically drains them by like 10 levels or something, which is pretty severe. And I really like these. I think these are delicious opportunities for players to get that kind of emotional weighted decision at the end. Hopefully the DM has made Prince Carius a really compelling, good-hearted character that the PCs like, so that they would make these decisions, or at least have this be a difficult decision. And I feel like because it's the end of the campaign, that would then promote more players to be like, okay, yeah, I could see myself like sacrificing my character, who's just been a very good character, to save this boy's life, essentially, or give this boy another chance. And there's a lovely epilogue about how he is just a good person, and he helps his sister rule, basically, even though he wants to stay out of the limelight because he had enough of this shit, basically. So I do like that epilogue and ending quite a bit. And then there are notes about going beyond the adventures, continuing the campaign, which a lot of it is just like plot hooks from various things that happened throughout the campaign. So the Twilight Child, the Cult of the Twilight Child in Yanmas, all the cities they had to deal with, all the events they had to deal with, different creatures that might have escaped their clutches. There's just notes on all of these. The biggest one I think of is, the one that's mentioned here, who's given his own mention, is that creature, that name I can't pronounce, one that starts with a T, the one with the ravens, and the one that actually ripped the soul out for the evil Duke. He could actually be a post-game, DLC, if you want to think about it, villain, and then the players have to go to his demi-plane called the Palace of Nightmares. It's all, there's Thasrutum, the Mewling Storm, a Sakila of immense power, which sounds like a really cool thing for these like level 18 PC, assuming nobody sacrificed themselves. If they really want to continue the adventure, obviously none of that is going to be published material or anything like that, so you'd have to really just do it all yourself. But it's really good that all that information is there, and there's enough ideas here to make that an exciting avenue to pursue for any kind of DMs and players that want to basically continue this story, because I think it's been a really solid adventure. We'll go over the pros and cons for this module specifically, but overall I have a pretty good thumbs up for this Pathfinder Adventure Path. This is really my first adventure path that I've ever looked at. Like I haven't paid close attention to Pathfinder in recent years, especially with the adventure paths. But this, in terms of being a DM and actually reading through all of one, over however many months it's been now, I do like this one a lot. Some of them have been not as great as others, for sure, and some of them have a tendency to repeat the same kind of themes over and over again in each one. But in terms of creating that theme of a political upheaval and having to do all these social networking things, but still in a fun, like role-playing, skill check kind of way, I think it really does succeed at doing that. Alright, so pros. My quick pros for the 6 Legend Soul. Let's pop off to a better looking screen. Probably the flash page. God, this is getting so long now. There we go. Okay. Quick pro. So it's got a good balance of dungeon crawling, puzzles, investigations, social encounters, and big narrative moments. A lot of modules suffer from going too far into one direction. You know, maybe not enough dungeon crawling. Maybe it's just all a dungeon crawl. And I really think this one has a really good balance of all of those things put together, and provides basically something for everyone, which is really nice to have, especially in the conclusion of the campaign. Pro, it uses the major campaign spanning NPCs of Princess Eutropia and Prince Carius in hugely exciting ways. Both of them are used to great effect. Eutropia's obviously assassination is the entire focus of Part 1, and then she can even return to the players at the end of Part 2 in a very triumphant way. And then Carius provides the sort of pseudo-main antagonist, or at least problem the players would deal with in Part 3. And both of these characters, Eutropia has been with them since Part 1. Excuse me, and Carius, I believe, was introduced in Part 3. He was the focus of Part 3, which was actually rescuing him by the end of that module. So that's been really cool that they use those characters, which should have a big personal relationship to the players. Pro, the Shadowed Halls is a big, cool dungeon crawl with lots of nefarious traps, secrets, and villains. I do like my dungeon crawl, something you've probably seen of my reviews. A lot of the War for the Crown modules have been very light on dungeons, or maybe they'll include one kind of medium dungeon or something. This one I really think is a nicely, satisfyingly big dungeon crawl. Probably not my favorite dungeon of the campaign, but I think it's a good one. It's pretty satisfying. And pro, for once, this War for the Crown adventure does not involve bumming around a city doing side adventures. Now, I say that even though it kind of has that at the beginning of Part 3, where you're wanted criminals and you have to do things in Taldor, but it's not like the other adventures where that's basically Part 2, is you're in a city and you're doing all these little, you're going all these little mini dungeon maps, warehouses and whatnot, mansions, and doing little things. That's not really what you're doing here. You're returning to Taldor, and you're having to do a bunch of social stuff to work your way back up. And I'm not a huge fan of it, but not even to where... Well, yeah, I did put that in a con. All right, let's go to the cons. I have to read over my notes. So con... The first con is, as I mentioned before, a major element in the murder investigation. Part 1 involves digging up and searching through the remains of a dead dog. I do not like that at all. I think there are ways to do that without being so horrendously awful. It's just not something I'm comfortable with, not something I know most of my players would be comfortable with. That's a personal thing for me, but I would not include so much of that. The farthest I would go would probably be allow the players to maybe cast like Speak with the Dead on the dog, and then make sure that dog is... I would put the dog in gentle repose next to the body then, and not have them have to literally dig the fucking dog up out of the ground and exhume it. Not comfortable with that. Alright, then second con, as I mentioned, that part in the beginning of Part 3, we have to spend several days of social encounters to regain the favor of Taldor, and it just feels like where it's placed in the adventure that they wanted to use one last bit of that kind of social standing thing. But the way it works, I feel like it's a betrayal of what the PCs have been doing, which is working their way up to being notable heroes of Taldor, and all of a sudden to just come out of this big adventure, riding this big high, and then come out and be like, oh no, they're branded as villains. You'd be like, what the fuck? Like, we've been doing all this work for this long, and it took like 2 days for our names to be besmirched to where we're literally hunted in the streets? Like, that seems a little ridiculous to me, and I wasn't totally satisfied with the way that feels like it would play out, but thankfully I think I think a good DM can certainly work with that and make it so the PCs will either enjoy that or gloss over that quite a bit and let them get to Carius as quickly as possible, because I do like the fact that once they get to Carius, the adventure picks back up and becomes really nice at the end. So my final verdict is, with a solid balance of dungeon crawling, high-stakes storytelling, and social investigations, the 6 Legend Soul provides a very satisfying conclusion to an excellent adventure path. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.